The Williams family, a black millionaire family, boarded their first-class seats on the flight from London to America. The cabin was calm, almost serene, with soft lighting and plush leather chairs. They were dressed simply, but their calm, graceful demeanor gave them an air of dignity that belied the wealth they secretly carried. The father, Mr. Williams, a successful businessman, sat beside his wife, Alana, while their two children settled into their seats. No one could have predicted what would unfold during this routine flight. As they settled in, they noticed a young flight attendant, Sadie Sink, eyeing them from across the cabin. Her demeanor was cold, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly as she walked past them, almost as if she had already judged them. She was an American, and to her, a black family dressed in such simple attire was out of place in the first-class section. What she didn't know was that the Williams family was no ordinary family. But her ignorance was about to cost her in ways no one could imagine. The flight attendants moved quickly to serve drinks, but Sadie's gaze lingered on the family. It wasn't just a look of curiosity. It was something darker, something filled with judgment. As she approached their seats to offer a drink, she couldn't help but mutter, "People like you don't belong in this class." Her voice was barely audible, but her words were like daggers. The air seemed to freeze as the Williams family exchanged uncomfortable glances. The moment had passed, but something in the air was off. Unseen by the passengers, Sadie's cruelty lingered, and no one had a clue that this small incident would set off a chain of events no one could foresee. As the plane cruised thousands of feet above the ocean, the tension in the cabin grew thicker. Sadie continued her rounds, but her eyes frequently returned to the Williams family. It was clear that something about them bothered her, and it was only a matter of time before she did something to make her distaste clear. Mr. Williams, sensing the subtle hostility, tried to shake off the discomfort. After all, they had encountered prejudice before, and they knew how to handle it. But something about this felt different. It was more than just the usual stares and whispers. There was an underlying anger, something personal. Sadie's interactions with them became more frequent, but her attitude only grew worse. She made condescending comments about their attire, implying that people of their kind should not be allowed to enjoy such luxuries. The Williams family's children, who were used to their parents handling these situations with grace, began to feel uneasy. Alana, the mother, exchanged a look with her husband. They both knew the tension wasn't just about class. This was about race. They had dealt with it all their lives, but it was still painful to experience it in such an open, hostile manner. Then, in a moment that shocked everyone, Sadie approached them, her eyes flashing with anger. Without any warning, she reached down and yanked at Alana's dress, ripping it in a single brutal motion. The entire cabin went silent. Passengers looked on in shock, unsure of how to react. But the damage had been done. The room fell into an eerie silence. The rip of Alana's dress echoed in the cabin like a slap. The family was humiliated. The anger and discomfort that had been building for hours finally burst to the surface. Alana stood up immediately, her face flushed with a mixture of shock and fury. "I'm sorry," Sadie muttered, but there was no real apology in her voice. It was just a formality, and everyone in the cabin could sense it. The passengers, who had been watching in silence, now exchanged uncomfortable glances. Some of them shifted in their seats, unsure whether to speak up or remain passive. But no one intervened. In that moment, the Williams family felt the full weight of their difference. They were more than just a black family on a plane. They were an other in Sadie's eyes, unworthy of even the basic respect that anyone in first class should receive. Tears welled up in Alana's eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. Mr. Williams was furious, but he kept his voice steady. "This is not the way to handle things," he said, his voice cold with restraint. "But we will handle this." He stood up, taking Alana's hand, and together they walked toward the third-class cabin. They didn't say anything, but the message was clear. They would not let this humiliating act define them. But they couldn't help but wonder, how much more would they have to endure before things changed? The flight attendant's actions had crossed a line, but what happened next was even more shocking. Without so much as a word of explanation, Sadie escorted the Williams family to the third-class cabin. It was cramped, uncomfortable, and far from the luxurious environment they had been enjoying. Sadie made a dismissive gesture, as if it were a simple inconvenience to move them from the first-class cabin. The Williams family didn't fight it. They quietly moved to their new seats, feeling the eyes of the other passengers on them. It was the kind of feeling that couldn't be shaken, a feeling that they were being punished for something they had no control over. The third-class passengers, most of whom were white, stared at them with a mix of curiosity and discomfort. They, too, had no idea who the Williams family really was. To them, this was just another black family in the back of the plane, subject to the same discrimination they had witnessed countless times. But there was more to the Williams family than they knew. Mr. Williams sat down, looking out the window. He felt his anger rising again, but he knew there was a time for quiet resilience. This wasn't over. Alana squeezed his hand. "Let's just get through this," she whispered. They had no idea that what was about to unfold would change the entire course of the flight and their lives forever. As the flight continued, the Williams family sat quietly in their third-class seats, processing the humiliation. The last thing they wanted was to cause a scene, but something had to be done. Mr. Williams glanced at Alana. They shared a look of understanding. This was not just about them. It was about a larger issue, a systemic problem that needed to be addressed. Suddenly, Mr. Williams pulled out his phone and dialed a number they both knew well. Peterson. Peterson wasn't just a friend. He was a powerful ally in the business world, and he owned several major airlines, including the one they were currently flying. When Peterson answered, Mr. Williams didn't waste time. "Peterson, we need to talk." Peterson was surprised, but Mr. Williams didn't explain everything at once. Instead, he simply said, "I need you to do something. I'll explain later. Just trust me." Peterson agreed, sensing the urgency in his friend's voice. What no one on the plane could have predicted was that Mr. Williams was about to take matters into his own hands in a way that would leave everyone in shock. The flight was no longer about a simple journey between London and America. It was about to become a lesson in power, class, and race that no one would ever forget. As the plane began its descent into America, the air was filled with a palpable tension. The passengers who had witnessed the events unfolding were still processing what had happened. There was an eerie silence in the cabin, broken only by the hum of the engines. And then, just before landing, an announcement came over the loudspeaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have just received some important news. I want to inform you that from this moment forward, the ownership of this airline has changed. The new owners are none other than the Williams family, who are currently aboard this flight." The cabin erupted in confusion and shock. People whispered to each other, trying to understand what was happening. Had they heard that correctly? The Williams family? The same family that had been escorted to third class? No one could believe it. The flight attendants looked at each other in disbelief. Sadie's face turned pale. She was the last person to expect this turn of events. The announcement continued. "The Williams family already owns 7 major airlines, and from this moment, they are the new owners of this one. Please join me in welcoming them." The passengers were in stunned silence, and slowly, one by one, they turned their gaze toward the Williams family. It was a moment of reckoning. Sadie stood frozen in place, her hands trembling. The realization hit her like a freight train. The very people she had humiliated, the ones she had judged and discriminated against, were now the ones in control. The weight of her actions came crashing down on her. She had underestimated them, and now she would pay the price. The Williams family didn't say a word. They simply sat back, unbothered by the shift in the room. They had known this moment would come, even if they hadn't planned it quite like this. They had always known that their wealth and influence would speak for themselves one day. But they had hoped it wouldn't come to this. They had hoped for change, without needing to prove anything. Sadie, who had once felt powerful in her ignorance, now felt small and insignificant. She was the one who had ripped the dress, the one who had judged them based on their skin color. And now, she was the one who was being judged. Her colleagues whispered behind her back, but Sadie couldn't hear them. All she could hear was the sound of her own shame. But there was still one more step for the Williams family to take. After the announcement, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The passengers, once curious and judgmental, now felt like they were in the presence of someone important. But what had begun as a moment of triumph for the Williams family was about to take another turn. Sadie stood in front of them, her face flushed with embarrassment. She took a deep breath before speaking. I want to apologize, she stammered. Her voice cracked as she spoke. I was wrong. I judged you. I didn't know who you were, and I was wrong to treat you the way I did. Her apology hung in the air, awkward and reluctant, but the Williams family didn't respond immediately. They let her words linger. Finally, Mr. Williams looked up at her. It's not enough, he said quietly. Your apology isn't enough, but we forgive you. The room went quiet. No one had expected this. Everyone had been waiting for a dramatic response, but the Williams family offered none. They simply offered forgiveness. The plane touched down in America, and the passengers slowly began to disembark. But no one was quite the same. They had witnessed a shift in power, a real-world example of what it meant to judge people based on the color of their skin. As the Williams family walked through the terminal, people stared at them with awe. No one knew what they had endured on the plane, but they could sense that these were not just ordinary passengers. The Williams family walked through the airport as new owners of the airline, their heads held high. And though they had been humiliated on that flight, they knew that they had won. They had shown the world that no matter how much you are looked down upon, you can rise above it. And they were determined to make sure this lesson wasn't forgotten. The Williams family stood at the gates of the airport, looking out at the horizon. They had come a long way from that moment on the plane. But there was still more to be done. They had witnessed firsthand the discrimination that still existed in the world, and they were determined to change it. Today, we taught a lesson, Mr. Williams said, his voice steady. But it's not just about power or wealth. It's about dignity. It's about respect for all people, no matter who they are. Alana nodded. We wanted to show that no one should ever feel less than anyone else, no matter what they wear, what color their skin is, or where they sit on a plane. Their children smiled, and together they walked away from the airport, ready to face whatever came next. They knew that the journey ahead was long, but they were ready to make a difference. The world had witnessed a moment of change, and they were at the heart of it.